All right, let's get you ready for that next big React interview. Think of this as your personal coaching session. We're going to walk through the most critical questions, break down what interviewers are really looking for, and give you the A-plus answers to land that job.
So here's how we're going to break this down. I've laid this out just like I would an actual interview, focusing on 4 key areas. We'll start with the fundamentals, React's core philosophy, then we'll dive into data and state, get you up to speed with modern hooks, and finish up with the heavy hitter topics, architecture and performance.
All right, first up, we're going to hit the fundamentals. Any good interviewer is going to start here, just to see if you really get the why behind React, not just the how. It's about understanding its place in the world of web development.
So this one is almost always the opener. It sounds simple, right? But believe me, your answer here really sets the stage for the whole interview. We're not just looking for a definition from a textbook. We want to see if you understand the core problems React was built to solve.
Okay, so if you want to nail this, you have to hit these key terms. First, make it clear it's a JavaScript library, not a framework. That little detail shows you know the difference. Then you've got to talk about its component-based architecture, which is all about building reusable UI blocks. And of course, mention the virtual DOM for its incredible performance. Bonus points if you bring up one-way data flow, because that shows you're already thinking about state management.
See? If you give a great answer like that, you're basically leading the interviewer to the next logical question. You mentioned components, so of course, now they're going to ask about JSX, which is totally central to how we write them.
So what exactly is JSX? The key thing to understand is it's not just what it is, but why we use it. It's a syntax extension. It looks like HTML, but it's living right inside your JavaScript. Now, you have to mention that browsers don't actually read JSX. That's where a tool like Babel comes in. It translates that easy-to-read JSX into regular React.createElement function calls. The main takeaway? It makes our code way more readable.
Okay, great. Now that we've covered the basics, let's get into the real meat of how React works. This is all about how data moves around and how components manage their own information.
Okay, listen up, because this one is an absolute deal breaker. I'm serious. If you can't clearly and confidently explain the difference between props and state, the interview is probably not going to go well. It is that fundamental.
This table breaks it down perfectly. Let's look at data flow. Props are for passing data down from a parent to a child. And look at mutability. They are read-only. The child can't change them. State, on the other hand, is the component's own private business. It's managed internally, it's mutable, and when it changes, React knows it needs to re-render the UI.
Let's make this super concrete. Imagine a button. The label on it, like "Click Me," that's a prop passed down from its parent. But a counter that tracks how many times you've clicked it, that's its own internal state. And remember, the biggest red flag you can raise for an interviewer is trying to change a prop. Don't do it. They flow one way.
This naturally leads to the next question, which is all about applying this knowledge. Interviewers love asking about forms because it's such a common, real-world use case for state. So the answer here is all about controlled versus uncontrolled components. With a controlled component, you can see the input's value is tied directly to React state. The state is the single source of truth. With an uncontrolled one, you're letting the DOM do its thing, and you use something like a ref to grab the value when you need it.
So why do we almost always go with controlled components in the real world? Simple. It gives you total control. Because the value lives in the React state, you can validate it with every single keystroke, you can disable a button until the form is perfect. It just makes everything more predictable and powerful.
All right, let's shift gears to something more modern. If you're interviewing today, there is absolutely no way around it. You have to know hooks. This is how we write React now.
When an interviewer asks about hooks, what they're really doing is checking if you're up to date. They want to know if you understand the why, the problems with old class components that hooks came along to solve.
The bottom line is, hooks just made everything simpler. Remember class components? You had all that boilerplate with constructors and the confusing this keyword. Hooks changed the game. They let us hook into React features like state and lifecycle methods, but right inside simple, clean JavaScript functions. It made our code way easier to write and reuse.
You've got to know the big ones. UseState is your bread and butter for adding state. UEffect is for anything that happens on the side, like fetching data from an API. UseRef is your tool for when you need to talk directly to a DOM element. And UseMemo is your secret weapon for performance, to avoid rerunning expensive calculations.
Now, UEffect is a favorite topic for interviewers, specifically that dependency array.
If you pass an empty array, the effect runs just once when the component mounts, perfect for an API call. If you put variables in there, the effect will rerun whenever those values change. And that little return function, absolutely critical for preventing memory leaks.
Okay, let's zoom out and talk big picture. This is where you separate yourself from the pack. We're talking about the deep-down concepts that explain how React is so fast, and how you build apps that can actually scale.
So, the virtual DOM. This is really React's secret sauce. Your answer here shows if you have that deeper, under-the-hood understanding of what's going on that makes React feel so snappy and efficient.
The best way to answer this is to explain the reconciliation process. So, state changes. What happens? React doesn't immediately mess with the browser's DOM. First, it builds a whole new virtual DOM tree in memory. Then, and this is the magic part, it diffs the new one and the old one to find the absolute minimum changes needed. And finally, it updates the real DOM with just those changes all at once. That's the key to its speed.
Nailing the VDOM question often leads to a follow-up about how you handle things when your app gets huge. Because as it grows, you're going to run into this annoying problem called prop drilling.
So what is prop drilling? It's exactly what it sounds like. You're drilling a prop down through component after component that don't even need it, just to get it to a child way down the tree. It gets messy fast. The first tool you should reach for is React's built-in context API. But for the really big, complex apps, that's when you'd start talking about dedicated state management libraries like Redux or ZooStand.
And that brings us to one last high-level question. Client-side rendering, or CSR, is what React does out of the box. The browser gets a tiny HTML file and a big chunk of JavaScript, and then React builds the page. Server-side rendering, or SSR, used by frameworks like Next.js, builds the page on the server first and sends fully formed HTML. This is much faster for that initial page load and way better for SEO. Look, if you can master these core concepts, you'll be in fantastic shape for that interview. Now go out there and ace it. Good luck.